So thank you everyone for being here. My name is Carolyn Mullen. I'm the director here at the Senior Center. And this is a brand new opportunity for us. This is a concept that Alan Brunsman came up with himself to really highlight the innovations that we've had in Yellow Springs. It's been a pretty remarkable ride here over the last few hundred years. And I think much of what Alan's going to cover tonight is some of the most incredible stuff we can say came out of Yellow Springs. But there's more to cover. And on that vein, if you yourself are aware of somebody or something that we should cover, I would love to hear about it. We're looking for more opportunities to cover more topics because we know it's kind of an endless list of things that have come out of Yellow Springs, not just in science, but lots of innovations. So welcome. And if you would please remember to silence your phone. And if you need a restroom, they are through the door that is open, and on the right, there's two restrooms. They are ungendered. Joining us on Zoom, which is being recorded, are two of Leland Clark's daughters, and another of his daughters is here, Becky. And I'm sure you'll hear more about that from Alan, who's got all of the info you could want. Well, and remember, this is actually a two-part. I need to clarify. We can't cover everything in one night. So we will be bringing back Alan in June to cover the second phase, second part of this.
Let me see this. I'm working. Okay. You can hear me? All right. Follow up on that. I got this thing going together and I was thinking, okay, I'll try and get the first part in, which was basically an overview of all the inventions, okay, and other things. And then I do a second one in which we probably do some experiments or show people how the things work. Okay, well, the first part is too long. So I don't know whether she'll give me a third one. Okay, I'm Alan Brunsman. In Yellow Springs, I'm known as Becky's husband. What was that?
She said, sorry, but you're right.
And I worked at YSI for 28 years. In fact, just came from Columbus, and moved into Yellow Springs, and I was like 68. Associated with Lee Clark for 35 years. I'll be referring to him probably in a variety of ways. I'll probably use Lee and Leland and Dr. Clark and everything else. Most likely I'll use Lee because it was just a casual relationship between me and him. First slide there is just shows Lee in a heart-lung machine. And the thing I stressed, which you may have seen it in the announcement, the Edison of medicine. They tend to say,
The father of biosensors.
yeah, father of fire sensor, something not, well, no, they strike it down, they get it down to the biosensor. And the biosensor was just basically half of his life, not the full life. And so, and the Edison part of it, Edison was, everybody, I got a slide on this, and I don't use that. Say it forward. Nope. Aha. Well, I'm going to go slightly. When I worked for YSI, I left in '96. Okay. And I went out and did ventures over in Indianapolis for about 17 years. But I realized that I was in an unusual place. YSI and Clark were just entirely, I'm not sure many people, could understand how enriched that environment was. And so at that time, me and Dorothy Scott decided to order videos. This is O2, as what it says. And I'll try my stick. Oops, hit the button. Okay, that's me 20-some years later, here before. That's Lee. Susan?
Yeah.
I get the name. Linda, Becky. And what was the fourth one? Joan, okay, sorry. We did tapes, and we did Hardy Trolander, Dave Case, Ray Schiff, Chuck Kimball, and Lee.
Wow.
And they were done casual, and Lee's tape is about 2 hours long, so it's I will put it, try and get it out on YouTube or something like that, but it's basically, you know, you gotta be patient, and it's done casually. They're just talking about different things. And that was the idea, make it a casual interview as opposed to a fixed interview. Okay. Through here, I'll hit different parts of that tape. And that's about what you're gonna get. I'll try and put the tape out online or something like that. And see if people can watch the whole thing if they got time. What else about this? This is Lee and his wife, Eleanor. Okay. I can't. She was such an integral part of his work. I mean, she literally responded to everything he did and could read all, gathered the literature for him and read the literature and told him about him. Just he was another part of him. And if you met him, you know, you could just tell they were just, you know, right and left hands basically. So.
Lost the image. Oh, it's going to the next.
Oh, it's the next slide. Now, if I can get it to. See if I can get it to work.
Science fascinates his mind. It always has. His life is a roadmap of invention and discovery that continues to leave an indelible mark on our world.
For some reason or another, I'm always attracted to the problems that if you solved it, you solved a lot of problems all at once.
Dr. Leland C. Clark is the 2005 winner of one of the top 3 prizes in engineering in the world, the Fritz J. and Dolores H. Russ Prize. Fritz and Dolores Russ founded the Russ Prize in 1999 to honor those in the engineering profession whose work benefits humanity. Leland Clark grew up in Rochester, New York during the difficult days of the Great Depression.
At the time I was growing up, whether it was depression, there really was no money for much of anything. And so if you wanted a toy, you made one. So I and my brothers made little trucks, steam shovels, and all kinds of things.
Dr. Clark attended the University of Rochester School of Medicine, planning on becoming a doctor. But in graduate school, his focus changed from medicine to research on the paradigm of a single idea.
By then I'd picked up the thought that I don't think I want to be a doctor and just treat one patient at a time and then maybe get in a fight with another doctor because I'm doing something he should be doing. And besides, it's only a one at a time deal. While if research is your aim, then you can treat 10,000 patients at once.
Science fascinates his mind. It always has.
You saw on there was the father of biosensors or something like that. Okay, and to me that was just a small part of the whole picture of Lee. So I like the Edison of medicine, and so for that I just listed some of Edison's, and that gives you an idea. You know, he did a lot of different things. Okay, you know, photographs, motion pictures, light bulbs, et cetera. Okay, well, Lee did a lot of things, and I didn't mean him to have a longer list. They just kind of made a list, and that's the way it is. Okay, so you know you can see a lot of interesting stuff on there, and we're going to go through pretty much that list. But again, it's a lot of different things like Edison did. That's the idea. So I like the Edison of medicine. Okay. Lee had at least 50 U.S. patents. And he was very prolific in writing. 200 publications is probably half of it or something like that. He just seems like every time he turned around, he's publishing another paper. Okay, the way I structured this is to go through a timeline. And scared me when I put this up. All right, so what I got in the bottom is where he lived. And the dates, I'm sure, are not absolutely correct, but they give you an idea. And then inventions and things along the line. So, you know, he came to Antioch after graduating from college in 44 and stayed here until 58. Went to Alabama and worked there. Went to Cincinnati research place in that period, came back to Yellow Springs in Antioch then and worked for SBI, but still in Yellow Springs. If you have a question, just get my attention. I tend this to be very open on that. I don't care if we go over, you know, again, I'm going to divide it into, so feel free to ask a question. And I'll ask questions of Rob. Yes?
I just wanted to say that, point out that they both went to Antioch College too.
Oh, his wife. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were born 15 days apart or something. What was the
They were born 5 days apart.
5 days?
In 1918, yeah. And they both came from New York, different parts of New York. But they may have come to Antioch for the first day on the same train. All right. But they didn't meet until a couple months later in front of the science building. Of course.
Of course.
What was his association with it?
He was a professor there, and I forget what he's taught. He taught science of some sort. I can't remember.
Well, I remember that he was at Fells.
That also.
Yeah, and so there was an affiliation between that and. Yeah, you might have some. Give me a minute and keep going.
Okay.
Fells was the place that was looking at human.
I got a slide on
Okay, okay, yeah.
Everybody who was at Fells was a researcher, had an appointment in Antioch. Prestige reasons, some of them taught,
Yeah.
some of them didn't. And I don't know what the situation was here.
I think he may have taught, but I know he worked for Fells.
Yeah, he was the biochemistry chairman of the biochemistry department at Fells Institute on Antioch campus. So that was the tie-in. As you said, they were two associations that affiliated together.
Right, so Yellow Springs, Antioch College, Fells, 1944. For those of you that don't know, that's the Fells building. Is there anybody that doesn't? Okay, there's some of Fells. What their challenge was, and the overview of Fells longevity study. Is there anybody here that was in the study? Aha! I wondered if I would get one. The study.
Susan and Joan, I'm sure were too.
Pardon?
Susan and Joan, I think, were in it too.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe Linda too.
Basically, the study, let's see if I can find it up here. Here we are, decades to provide valuable information. They accepted people, tell me if I'm wrong. Somebody said it. They accepted people into it and they plotted them for their whole life. And obviously the data is still going here.
But they were also using extremely precise measurements at Fells. In other words, like, you go to your doctor's office and you step on the scale, but how much, body fat and muscle and all the rest of the water, they were measuring those weights in a very precise manner and collecting a lot of data in that regard, a lot more.
Yeah, and when Fells shut down the building, the data's supposed to have gone to Wright State. Now, what they did with it, I have no idea. And whether they're still gathering.
Some of it is up the back porch.
There's a
raw data.
There's a comment online from Joan. She says she was not in the study because children of the fellows were not allowed to be.
Okay.
More people.
Well, and I remember a discussion about with Dr. Clark talking about how one of his original focus points was on people that were overweight.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he was looking at technologies that could manage that challenge, and he was using psychotropic drugs. He was, in other words, he was using things like LSD, ketamine, psilocybin, and those were not controlled products at that time. So it was a research opportunity to see how those things could affect somebody's issues. And then they became controlled substances. And he wasn't going to work with controlled substances because the government would then be directing his research. And so one of his superpowers in my little discussion of him in my head is that he could pick really important problems. And so he had an important problem, dealing with overweight, helping people be healthier, but now that really wasn't on the radar. So he looked for another important problem and he focused on the heart-lung machine. Because that required a skill set like he had, very interdisciplinary. And that's where he put his energy, and that was at the Fells Institute. The first working heart-lung machine with animals, a dog, was at Fells in the garage.
I showed the building.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And so,
Introduce yourself.
I'm Rob Spokane, and I worked for Dr. Clark at Children's Hospital. I originally started in Cincinnati at Procter & Gamble after finishing college and got my doctorate. And Dr. Clark was a consultant that I used on a program to measure oxygen in the surface of the skin. And so after meeting him at Children's and realizing I was not a P&G kind of guy, I like to wear sandals and, that kind of so that's not, they don't like that at Procter & Gamble. So I said to Dr. Clark, and he'll always be Dr. Clark to me. I said, I'd like to work for you. And he said, well, we don't have a job for you. And I said, well, what are you going to do about it? And he said, we're going to create. I said, okay. He liked me. So they created a position, a research scholar, they called it at Children's Hospital. And I told him I would stay with him until he retired. And so I did. And then we, after multiple being fired by him, but not really, he was not an easy boss, but he was a great boss. And so it gave me an opportunity to do something worthwhile. And also I had a quest to understand where his greatness came from. I wanted to understand why this guy was the Edison of medicine and what skill sets did he have and how did he apply them. And, he had incredible powers of observation. Even when he was losing his vision from cataracts, and he couldn't legally drive, he could still walk into an experiment that we were, running with some physicians and myself, and he would point out what we were doing wrong. Or he'd ask us to do something a little different. And we couldn't imagine how he could do that because he couldn't even see well. And that's just one example, but so incredible powers of observation, the interdisciplinary skill set, which we mentioned, an incredible memory. And he was very bullheaded. I mean, if he decided he wanted to get something done, it was going to be done. And he was driven. And because the problems he was picking, he selected very carefully so that they would really make a difference. And he consistently was able to do that by reviewing literature and doing this kind of work.
So one of the first things he did there was he developed an artificial kidney. Okay. Blood comes in one side, it goes through a cellophane membrane, and the waste goes out the other side. That's basics of an artificial kidney for dialysis. This is a picture of somebody on a dialysis machine. They're taking blood from them, running them through a filter, come back, put it back into them. People hate that.
With your early ones, washing machines?
That's another point that in the Korean War, somewhere between 1950 and 53, Dr. Kreff decided that he needed a dialysis machine for the soldiers because they had so many kidney problems. And he made one. And the story, made up story, also talked about that on a MASH series.
Okay.
So, you can go look at the MASH series and see about making a dialysis machine. Okay, this is, just give some numbers.
Do you mind reading that out loud? The screen can't see it.
Okay, basically, it's shows 2 million people without reading every word of it. 2 million people receive dialysis treatment each year. Approximately 500,000 new patients every time, and 200,000 students, no patients each year. It's quite a business. Lee, you know, he had the possibility of doing something with that, you know, he had this part of it, but the people at Fells didn't think it fit into their charge. Okay, so they wouldn't let him follow through. So he may have been the person that came up with the machine and everything like that, and had all those customers, you know, blah, 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 but he didn't because Fells didn't want it. This is the building Rob's talking about. It's behind the Fells building. Antioch's using it for the maintenance department. Okay, in that building, they developed the heart lung machine.
I have a comment from Joan saying that Leland's father had heart disease and that she thinks this is part of what motivated him to figure out how heart surgery could be improved.
Could be. He did a lot of for a variety of people. They would give him samples of animals, organs, and they wanted to use them for testing. And he had the assignment of keeping them alive. And so, you know, here he came to the realization, well, I can keep these things alive. Maybe I can keep a heart alive. So that was sort of the motivation for getting into it. In a heart lung machine, you got something to do oxygenation, something to do with circulation, something to do temperature control. They use it in cardiac surgery and emergency situation. Here's components. You have a pump, an oxygenator, heat exchanger, reservoir, tubing. Right. The function of the oxygenator is obvious: put oxygen in, CO2 out. Circulation, move the flow around, and temperature control. You're moving a person's body, blood around, and you have control of his temperature, basically. And they like to keep the person on the heart lung machine cool. Which has advantages for doing the surgery. Here we go again.
Was a machinist at Fells. He was one of the founders of Fells Spring. I think he was one of the 4 guys that started Richard Ford. So did he come in later, or he was? Dave Case was later, and one of the original. And he was a free soul. You know,
Talking about John Bentley.
To be confined to a job like thing. And when it came time to make our lung machine, as you can see from this picture, there was a lot of metal that had to be done. And I decided to remake everything of a certain type of stainless steel, and he knew how to do that in a way that's not easy. Take a piece of stainless steel rod that's certain kind of, that's what they made jail marks. Take a hacksaw and sort of thing, and when you scratch it, I mean, on a way that you get the settings right, you can just peel it down. So anyway, he was a good machinist. But he didn't want to work during the daytime. Because, you know,
Yellow Springs.
going to be a free zone. So that was. I didn't do any work on our lung machine during Fells working. Because they would have thrown me out the window. Maybe pay for the window. So I could say, well, John, I know it ought to be this big around, you know. and maybe we could have the valve of a wafer and like this. So he'd make it during the night, usually it'd be on Thursday night and Friday nights, and then I'd pick it up 6 in the morning or 7, he'd still be there, say. And maybe sometime just finishing it. And I'd take it in the car and go to Cincinnati, and that's what we tried. So I'm not sure how long that went on, but it was well over a year. That was just almost getting into a routine. And John was, Dean Kimball would make the electronics part. And John was, he only came down to Cincinnati with me once. To him, it was a place where this was going on with dogs and stuff. I don't think I could have gotten all the way there without a John Benedict. There was only one John Benedict around it. It's very hard to get somebody to make it. When I started to do it in Birmingham, there was some articles in the paper, and a guy named Whittington came up to see me, said, "Do you need a machinist?" And I was like, "Oh God, what am I going to do?" I figured, about 2/3 of the machine. I said, "Do I need a machinist?" I said, "Do you have a lathe?" He said, "No, but I know the guy that teaches the deaf and blind school, and they have a huge lathe there." So he said, "I'll get on their faculty."
So if you're gonna build something like this, like, look at it. I mean, this is only the plumbing and oxygenator and so on and so forth. It's a lot of work. Okay, now we're talking about the guy at Fells who has no machinery, no electronics, and he wants to develop this thing. I mean, I've developed, God, I don't know how many, maybe 20 or 30 different things. And part of it, he talks about getting somebody into it, this John Benedict. Okay, I'm sure he didn't pay him a cent. So you got this guy's working with you, and it's just amazing that he could do this. I mean, it's just, what else can I say? This is a picture of the machine again. And there, you can see a YSI thermometer there. Various oxygen cylinders. Okay. This is again operation. There's the YSI. Whoop. Nope.
By the way, while he's doing that, I forgot to say that this is Lee Clark's grandson.
Oh, hello.
My-
Okay. To qualify to use it on a human, they set up a criteria that they had to do 100 animals, perfect, with no problems in between. Okay. And the way they did
100 in
it,
a row.
now, I was getting there. Sorry, I didn't. So he was talking about how long it went, we'd go down to Cincinnati. Well, you can do it. If he did 100 on the weekend, this is when he would do it. How many weekends would that take? He's got 2 years of going down to Cincinnati to do the tests to prepare for doing it on a human. And I'm sure that it didn't, yeah.
Were they different animals or were they all dogs?
They were all dogs, and there were dogs out of a pound that they were gonna kill.
Yeah.
And some of them ended up at their house. They kept some of them to say. And again, every one of them lived in that test. So I'm sure at the start, so I didn't, whatever.
Different animal models,
And better mimic certain parts of the human body, so that, for example,
Yeah.
kidneys are certain animals and, hearts go to maybe dogs or something like that, but yeah, dogs are, it's kind of like a first step.
But you gotta remember, this is fifties.
Closest.
Joan is commenting also online. She said, before the invention of the heart-lung machine, open heart surgery could only be done on a functioning heart. Very
Right.
difficult, as you can imagine.
So you can imagine trying to stitch up something or change a vein or something like that on something. It's beating. So that's criteria of why this is a picture of a later model of the oxygenator. Okay. And you notice it's all glass. I think this is probably one they produced. I'll say when. Okay, what happens is blood comes in here and oxygen comes in here and there's a porous disc and it forms very small bubbles. And the bubbles go up through the blood. And then up here, there's glass beads coated. And it's a defoaming agent. And it takes the bubbles out of the solution. Bubbles go out, the vinegar goes out the top, the blood comes back here and goes down. So there's the, that's the debubbler.
Alan,
Yeah,
I have something I can add to that.
you go ahead.
That when he was doing this research, trying to figure out how to get the machinery to work, because it was very difficult to remove the bubbles. And any bubbles in the bloodstream were fatal because that would lead to low blood. So what he did notice, when he placed his powers of observation, he noticed that the little bubbles generated from that oxygenator were collecting at the silicone junction where the joints were brought together. You use silicone grease to put the pieces of glass together. He noticed the bubbles were coalescing and becoming bigger at that point. So he then figured, and this is one of those spontaneous experiments, he said he could take some Teflon shavings. So he had, Teflon shavings created, it's on a lathe, and he would coat those with silicone. And he put those in a tube. And then what happened with that is where the blood that's been oxygenated with these microbubbles pass through that, and then the big bubbles they'd all coalesce, and you'd have large bubbles, and those would exit through the top. And then the blood would come out, as Alan has showed in that drawing. But that whole process created a product line for Dow Corning for defoaming different materials, because it wasn't the silicone necessarily that was doing it, it was the silica in the silicone. And so there was a certain subset of the components that they figured out, which was actually driving this process.
You can buy it from them,
Now,
defoaming grease.
that's what it is.
You rub it around something and you get the bubbles out.
That didn't exist before that observation. And again, this is one of the things that I always was fascinated. How did this happen? It's because he looked at things so carefully, and he saw these micro bubbles coalescing at the junction on the glass. And then it created a whole product line for Dow Corning.
Any questions? I guess we've had questions, okay. This is something I didn't know. YSI for 2 years produced a heart-lung machine. He sold it. I had no idea they had a product. And the attribute, I'm assuming is the final model that Lee came up with. And they bragged about it because it has, between the stainless steel and the glass, you could sterilize it. And that was one of the attributes of that device, was that you can sterilize it, and you want to sterilize it between operation. And the bubbler is very efficient. Okay, manufacturers of heart-lung machines. There's quite a few people manufacturing.
Did he patent it?
No.
No.
Okay, this gives you an idea of how many surgeries performed. 400,000 annually.
And now, by the way, they're performed pretty much everywhere, even in community hospitals. It used to be you'd have to go to a big medical center. And certainly when spaces are big,
you know, just getting there was a problem and so on, but nowadays it's pretty standard procedure and stuff, which is just amazing. You know?
Yeah, even COVID, they used them for, E something, I can't remember, can't remember the name of the word.
ECMO.
ECMO,
Yeah.
thank you, ECMO.
So,
And it's basically, you're doing the same thing, except you do it all external, and the heart keeps going.
it's.
So because your lungs are tied up with the COVID, you want to get still oxygen in the blood, so they use the machine to move oxygen into the blood. Okay,
Yeah,
Extra.
corporeal membrane oxygenation.
That's
okay. It goes in one ear and
Another comment from Joan, she says one of the first applications was in mending heart defects in newborn babies, known as at that time as blue babies. Hundreds of these babies were saved using this machine.
the first person, the first person that they operated on in Cincinnati was a fireman. And
lung damage.
yeah, absolutely. Ah, okay. How I get this thing started. Let's see what it goes if I just did. Nope. Yeah. Help.
Try the space bar.
Sorry for the, oh, there it is. There's the magic. Okay.
Yeah. I have done more work earlier, actually. I've been going out to San Francisco with this where John Severing House was with the CO2 electrode, and that was, I think, their first use in clinical setting. It was for 6 months, and that was fascinating. And I was very involved in that job, and it was to use in heart surgery and post-operatively. And I found myself within about 3 weeks being in the position of an 18-year-old who knew more about blood gas and the post-operative course than anybody in the world. And, you know, how to tell surgeons, look, this patient's gonna die and you don't do this or this. And then they started having to go all around the hospital, because the physician would text about the die, you know, you track her, here's the. And so I was up there about 15 hours a day. That's politics of the yeah.
Susan, the oxygen electrode in a way was your ticket to John Severing House.
Right.
And then from there, you went to work for a physiologist in Canada who was interested in lung function and oxygen and things like that. He's a very famous physiologist. How long did you?
3 months. Actually, that job was boring. All I did was calculations on oxygen uptake during the stress test. That was before computers. That was before calculators did anything but add and subtract.
Then from there, you went to another laboratory in France, where also the main thing was oxygen metabolism and lung function, right?
Yeah. They did surgery on a dog 2 times a week, and I taught them to use the oxygen electrode, and then I introduced it to other hospitals.
You get a little bit of the background. Susan, well, Lee became experts on blood gas. And in the world, because of what they've done with the heart lung machine and so forth. And she ended up being sent around the world to help people. And I love the comment on, you know, here's an 18-year-old going into a hospital. Susan's very confident, by the way.
We grew up here in Mill Springs.
You
We moved
can
down.
imagine.
She was there just for her senior year. But otherwise, she went to John Bryan. And then she came back to Antioch after 1 year.
But you get an 18-year-old telling these doctors what to do with these situations, you know, just, you can imagine, especially a woman, right? Okay.
She wanted to go to medical school. None of them would take her because she was a woman. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I don't have it on this.
Now, most of them would.
She talks about interviewing for medical school, and it's just absurd what they would ask her, you know, when was your last period? Have you had sex? You know, well, anyway. Out of the heart lung machine, there became a need for an oxygen sensor. Okay. This history, a little bit of history bit is that Lee ran a test, published the article, and the people he tried to publish the article. They wouldn't publish the article because he didn't show the oxygen tension in the blood when the device was being measured. So this is, you know, somebody said I can't measure the oxygen in the blood, then okay, I'll make an invention to measure oxygen.
Yeah, don't tell me.
Don't tell me what I can't. Yeah, literally. Yeah.
And so, Alan?
Yeah.
I don't know if you're gonna discuss this, but what, how that came about relative to heart lung machine was that the traditional method that Dr. Clark was using.
Oh, yeah.
A series of test tubes filled with blood at different oxygen concentrations. And so there's a color chart.
Yeah.
And so the doctor could look at that color chart and tell if the blood was being oxygenated. The redder is better. See, and so the reviewers looked at that and they said, that's not acceptable. You know, we need a better way to measure oxygen. And the world had been trying to find a better way to measure oxygen. And so the story that I heard from Dr. Clark, if I'm remembering correctly, is he was sitting at a kitchen table. They were trying different ideas, and he had the idea of taking a glass tube and covering it with the cellophane wrapper from a package of cigarettes. And so he did that, and he was able to demonstrate that you could measure oxygen in whole blood with that configuration. And this might be a good time just to show the electrode.
Oh, great.
Okay, so we can do that. So I had the privilege, he was being interviewed for some television show, something like that. And so he made, and I helped him, but he did all the work. So this is the example of the original electrode. And it's just a glass tube in a glass tube. And I put a little membrane on there and a little platinum electrode. You put a silver wire in, you pour the electrolyte in, as Alan's pointing out there. And so this was all it took with his genius to create the oxygen electrode. And one of my favorite stories that he used to tell is he'd have a picture of this. And he'd have a picture of this with a paper clip. And so you'd have a paper clip to show scale.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we go. So here you have a slide up and you give it a talk and to show how small everything was. And then at the end of the talk, after he'd finished, and it was the right moment, he said, I'd like to show you the paper clip that was used for this particular photo, this image. And so they said, okay, and you pull out the paper clip. And so this is Dr. Clark. And so I found this, his stuff when, I was helping Becky deal with all the challenges, and I asked her if she wanted the paper clip, and she said no. And I said, well, I'm saving the paper clip because it's going to come in handy periodically in life. And so this points to his nature, how much fun he was. He really had a mischievous attitude towards many things. And so here you go.
So if he was measuring oxygen in blood, was he also measuring carbon dioxide that you know of?
No.
Okay, just the oxygen.
That was
Okay.
John.
There was a machine to do that
Yeah.
just later. We get to that.
No,
Oh, that's fine.
important. I mean, I'm
So
not
that was-
citing that one.
So that
Do you understand what we're talking about here as far as the electrode, how it works?
you have a membrane here that only lets gases through, okay? That's the cigarette paper. This, and in here, you got a solution and two electrodes, platinum or gold there. And silver over here. You run a voltage between them and you measure the current that goes through the solution. And the current is proportional to the oxygen. And why the Teflon? Why the membrane? It keeps other things out and the water in. And people knew that you could measure oxygen in a beaker with this arrangement. But he came up with this little bit here, you know, and it's amazing. I mean, just, you know,
Because there's things in the blood that would poison the platinum surface. And so it could no longer accurately measure oxygen, because it would change. So by isolating, only allowing oxygen to get through to the electrode, enabled it to be used in whole blood.
that's the patent. Now we're in the patents. On that. That's basically that drawing I just showed you.
Joan would like to cite his quote on his lab wall that said, "To air is human, to oxygenate is divine."
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
All right. The name stuck, a Clark oxygen electrode. And if you talk about this at any time, you refer to the Clark oxygen electrode, which is amazing how many things have that. Choose medical, environmental, research. The medical, you can see Harlan machines, et cetera, et cetera. Environmental, YSI's had a whole product line using oxygen environment measurements. You know, you got fish like to know fish will live or die depending on how much oxygen is in the water. So you got to go around and measure that kind of thing. So, and research is the handy measurement. Also, out of that hard lung machine, as I did very much earlier in the slides, they had to know the temperature. They wanted to control the temperature. Okay, so they had to come up with a temperature measurement. The temperature they started out with was a mercury glass thermometer. And you can imagine trying to control something. Well, anyway, just you can imagine. All right, temperature management is very, very vital component and bypass situation. Okay, you need to measure temperature in the surgical situation. You got to keep the person to a certain temperature. You don't want to go low, high, and you want to bring them out of it. Okay. Why do you have temperature? Metabolic control, protection of the organs, controlling cooling and heating and rewarming, improves surgical conditions, blood viscosity, reducing complications. So you can read more detail on that, but it's basically all that's dependent on the temperature. I love this part. I have a video of Hardy, and he talks about first temperature probe. Hardy was involved in the hard lung machine, and he describes it one way, and then on the video I have, Lee describes it another way. So, you know, I don't want to get in the fight. Just, you know, it's just different. But basically, they got a ceramic cylinder, ceramic piece that responded to temperature. Okay, and mounted wires on it. I think that again was Kimball that did that stuff, and hooked it up to a meter through a bridge, Wheatstone bridge, and it would respond to the change in temperature, and they had to calibrate it. Okay, so they would take the probe and put it in a bath, controlled temperature bath. And then this meter would go to a certain place, and they had, this is where they differ, they had smoked the meter, and they just, here it is at 98.6, and scratch the meter. You know, here's another temperature, scratch the meter. And that's how they controlled the temperature. And here's another shot of it. Basically, here's the ceramic piece. Electrical contact connected to it and epoxy over it. And YSI made those forever.
That what they call their mister.
Yep. And the way YSI calibrated them is they ground one of the sides. So you can change the resistance by making it a smaller piece. And until they put it in a bath with one that they knew the characteristics of, and they ground it until it matched that one. And that was the way they did it. Yeah. And so, you know, this is another example of a skin probe. Matter of fact, I have a probe back there. Oh, yeah, grab it. Too bad. Yeah, the original chips were all made by GE, and GE didn't want to stay in the business. So no, that's not the tag. Sorry.
Is it still back there?
Yeah. Oops.
I didn't see it.
What would they do with that plastic box?
Down there on the floor.
Maybe. Oh, well, and it wasn't back there. Yeah. Okay, let's see here. YSI's uses for the thermistors. YSI started producing and mass producing them, but again, they made a lot of money. YSI didn't follow through with the link machine. And they didn't do a artificial kidney, you know, why was that YSI at the time when all this stuff was doing was probably, you know, 10, 20 people, you know. Okay, they did it for environmental monitoring, aquaculture, laboratory research, industrial applications, and heating and air conditioning, food safety, healthcare, metrology. What was the features? Accurate, predictable range, and durable.
So did Dr. Clark patent oxygen sensor and thermistor?
He didn't patent it for Mr. No. I'm thinking YSI didn't patent it for Mr. I think they considered it the method more important than Mr. Method of calibrating it. And they kept that the company secret versus the inventing it.
Did you already create a suit with hundreds of thermistors on it for the space program?
Well, yeah, that's okay.
For the space.
Let me back up. Okay, yeah, that's another story. Another one of my tapes is on Ray Schiff. And Ray Schiff told stories about thermistors. Okay. And one of them was that he had an application where a person wanted one of them and he was going to go around Africa measuring body temperatures of elephants. Okay, where do you put a thermostat to measure the body temperature of an elephant? Carefully. Yeah, that's the best answer. And also that as Rob was saying, the space, every one of the astronauts ended up at the same measurement point. And they literally thought YSI was a pain in the ass. And I'll bet they're still using it. And I'll bet there's thermistors on the moon and on all space flights. It's just a handy device. All right, that's just again summary uses. All right. So another measurement is blood gas. Okay. And for blood gas, you need at least three things. You need to measure oxygen. So you have the Clark oxygen electrode. You need CO2. Well, you heard John Severinghaus and a few of these things. Well, John Severinghaus was a very famous inventor. Okay, he invented a CO2 electrode. Maybe Brock can do the chemistry of it. Basically, they measure pH of a chemical that reacts with CO2 and it changes the pH. It's very similar to the Clark electrode, but it's measuring pH instead of the current change.
They have a bicarbonate solution,
That's
but that's right, exactly.
handy to have a chemist in there. So what do you get out of it? They make a machine that takes these things and connects them together and gives you all, these are the kind of readings you get.
Yeah, and I don't mean to like tell you
What you already know, but this is so incredibly important, you know, that maintaining life is maintaining homeostasis and a kind of a constant balance.
And blood,
The
the pH of blood,
is very narrow.
like the normal range
Range might be
7.35 to 7.45.
that's a normal range. But anything outside the range of 6.8 to 7.8 is incompatible with life. And the body is constantly, through breathing and kidneys, maintaining
That pH. And you take in
like drink a Coca-Cola, that's really acidic. Or if you have a bicarbonate
you know, for your
stomach, that's really alkaline. You know, but measuring this in a critically ill patient is just so important in terms of.
And it also affects the amount of oxygen red blood cells.
Oh,
pick
yeah,
up. So
oh, yeah.
if you're measuring what's going on, you want to know what pH is because the cells react differently because you're trying to measure the amount of oxygen there.
Well, and you can use then the future with Alan is going to be talking about lactate after glucose. And so then you do a lactate measurement and it can actually define the metabolic status of the patient if they're going into respiratory or metabolic acid. And then that changes the whole treatment protocol.
Yep. But this is a list of things you can measure with a blood gas machine. And I downloaded this list off an AI program and it had lactose in there. But saying that the machines now do measure lactose. Okay. And if you watch these medical shows, they'll have, somebody's in trouble. Oh, get his lactate. That's another. Also, YSI invented that with Lee's help. Okay. It's a few of the things you can do with a blood gas instrument. Okay, this gives you an idea of how many of these are measured, how many times. 23 million blood gas are performed each year. Again, if you watch the medical shows, the guy comes in trouble, they get a blood gas. Another thing I was going to do there. Oh, I know what it was. Okay, so matter of fact, there was a box that we found out in YSI, and it was the first of the prototype of the first blood gas instrument. I don't know whether it's still there or they threw it out or whatever it was. And YSI then had the opportunity, much like the heart lung machine, to produce blood gas instruments. And they looked at that, and it's a very complicated measure. You've got oxygen, carbon dioxide, pH. You got a lot of standards for all this. People go to school for a long time to learn how to run these machines. So YSI, again, small company, didn't think they could handle it, so they didn't do it.
They were starting to partner with radiometer.
Pardon?
I was told that they were starting to partner with radiometer, and then they broke off that. And radiometer when completed the development, and now they're the #1 blood gas provider.
Yeah. Now you can see it's a very popular. Here's a list of people that make them. All right. So back to this chart. We're up to here, about 1958 it says. Okay, he goes to Alabama. He leaves Yellow Springs. He goes to Brunsman. He brought the heart lung machines to make them, he was talking about that thing where he had a machinist, found the machinist, again, how you make these things, the guy joins the school so he can get to the lathe so they can make heart lung machines. I mean, it's just, when you're in the early stages of products, you do it any way you can. And usually midnight hours and whatever. He also designed an operating room and recovery room for heart operations. Okay, this is the description of the intensive care unit that he built. Okay. And his thought talks about it again on the tape, and he was a little irritated with doctors and that they'd come in and do the heart lung operation. And he'd probably been there. And when they got done, they'd say, "Oh, close it up and go home." They didn't monitor the patient after that. No, the nurses can handle that. Everybody else can handle that. I've done my part. So Lee designed a intensive care unit that would handle the patients after they came out of surgery. And this is about as best as I could with pictures. Thanks, Becky. There's all these letters on here are showing the instruments in that room. And that was not standard at that time. I still don't think it's standard if you want the truth. To monitor the patient after surgery. The guy gets into everything.
That was the monitoring room in the hospital in Birmingham. That was a few doors down from Dad's labs. Dad would come in and look at it a lot and keep track of the patient.
Yeah. He also played around with the hyperbaric chamber. Okay, you want a hyperbaric chamber? You got a lot of knots. Okay, you're pressurized, put a person in a pressurized chamber. Okay, you can use it for decompression sickness, CO2 poisoning, wound healings, cerebral palsy, traumatic brain injuries, infections, sickle cells, burns, respiratory conditions. It's a they're using it now. It gets oxygen to where you want it to be. Burn patients, almost instantaneously put them in there. I think, was there one in the lab? I thought there was a baby one in the lab.
There was, I built one for larger animals.
Okay.
And for cerebral trauma, and there was a small one. And so we sometimes would use the small one for different purposes, but it was about this big. And then the one I built was and it ended up being given to Wright State to use to make their artificial. It was a materials issue to compress the bubbles, and in polymers. And this was for I'm trying to think the proper name of the group, but they were simulated patients. They were simulating patients.
So, played around with this. He developed a patent on a pump. I'm not sure it was ever used, but it had a lot of characteristics that were good. For one, you can see, well, I'm not going to get into the other. Okay, now we get into liquid breathing.
Do you know why I started initially looking at liquid breathing? Because of the heart lung machine.
Oh, okay.
Because they had to use so much volume of blood to prime the heart lung machine. And so they were trying to come up with a way to minimize the need for these liters of blood to prime the machine. And so he said, if we could create something that could carry oxygen and prime the machine with that first.
That's artificial blood is where you're at.
And that's how that original concept of artificial blood was planted, that seed. And then he started to take different liquids and he would immerse chemicals in the liquid And there was actually somebody that, with a predecessor to him on that, I can't think of his name right now, that did it with saline, bubbling saline. And with high pressures, you can sustain life, but we're not talking about high pressures. We're talking about atmospheric pressure. And so you needed to be able to carry a certain amount of oxygen, as much as hemoglobin, which water carries 6 mils per 100 cc's of water. 6 mils of oxygen in 100 cc's of water, whereas fluorocarbon carries 60, 10 times the amount. And so you could then use an emulsion, and you need to carry at least 30. So you could use emulsions with fluorocarbon and breathing oxygen, and it would carry enough could carry enough oxygen with the emulsion to sustain life. So that's how that kind of was introduced, that concept. And then he went to work, pick the right fluid to use for the artificial blood. He did the liquid breathing. And so initially, as I shared, the isotonic solutions could only carry 6 cc's of oxygen per 100 mils, and silicones couldn't carry enough because he tried silicones, but the fluorocarbons could. And so that's where the liquid breathing of a mouse immersed in fluorocarbon liquid with bubbling sparkling of oxygen sustained life.
That maybe I could mix fluorocarbon liquids. Now, if you take water and cooking oil, right? Or half and half, shake it up, they'll settle out, oil will come to the top, and nothing will go into the water later. If you put silicone oil in there, you can shake it up, and the silicone will be here, cooking oil will be here, and the water will be on the bottom. Well, it's possible if you're smart enough in the physical chemistry of materials to have as many as 12 different compounds, none of which is soluble in the other, and so on. So you can shake up these and get at least 11, probably 12 separate layers, which is an incredibly interesting thing to me still is. So one of the experiments I do would be like that. I try to save these tubes with the different liquids, they always kind of store. So he thought they'd be like. So anyway, I decided, I found to my total surprise that certain silicone compound oil would dissolve in fluorocarbon. So that way I could make a mixture of the two. Fluorocarbon liquids are very heavy. They just sink to the bottom of the beaker. Silicone oils are very light. They float to the top of water. So I thought, and it was the beginning of thinking that the cost of zooming out with a rocket with a man on board is all pulmonary, because basically, I don't know how many G's are in that group. That limits how fast you can take off, how many G's you can put on a man, and that's limited by the fact that his guts, if you want to put it that way, pull down like this, because his lungs are filled with air. So you might say in too many G's, the body pulls away from his lungs, and he can't breathe. If you could take off, and not you're zooming off where I don't know much at all, but if you could, the cost of a rocket decreases if you can have a higher velocity of takeoff. The higher that velocity is, the cheaper it is to actually do the whole thing with it. So I could not get it out of my mind that it would be nice if you could have a liquid that an astronaut could breathe during takeoff that had the same specific gravity as his body. So I mixed silicone oil and fluorocarbon oil of a certain structure of silicone, and it mixed, and it had a specific gravity of water.
So he did an experiment, which I actually got a video on, which can go into maybe the next session, that shows taking a mouse and putting him in this liquid with oxygen bubbling in it. And the mouse has a little problem when he first goes in there, but he settles down and just breathes normally.
Yeah.
And they've done it for quite a bit of time. So it's a neat experiment. And Steven Spielberg heard about this experiment. And in the movie The Abyss, they actually do the experiment. And so Steven, call him Steven, contacted Lee and said, you know, what can I do to pay you whatever to get this to happen? And Lee said, well, just autograph this picture. Yeah, that'll be enough. And so here, picture comes back and it says, squeak, Steven Spielberg.
And, but The Abyss was not a Spielberg movie, there was a TV show, a series of a Spielberg show. Sequest or something like that, I never saw it.
Oh, yeah.
But that's where he asked permission of Dad to use the liquid breathing thing.
Okay. I thought it was for The Abyss.
No, I did too, but somebody corrected me on it. But that was his concept in The Abyss. And I think he gave them permission too to use it.
Yeah.
Here's the clamp that they used on the mouse, it's one of several. But I just bought it because it's notched right here, so the mouse's tail can fit through there with the injured. And then, okay.
And the reason for the liquid breathing in The Abyss was they had to go very deep. And like Lee was talking about crushing somebody with takeoff with cheese, the same problem if you're going very deep and you have a lot of force from the water, it'll crush you. But if you have your lungs filled with liquid, the same density as you,
Navy
You can do
divers,
it.
they did it on Navy divers.
yeah, it has been done.
Yeah, they did one.
No, it's just, I would think if it wasn't such a, you're gonna do what to me? thing.
Moving the fluid takes a lot of musculature, actually. It doesn't move in and out like air does. So when the mouse would do the liquid breathing, it would actually do like that. That's how it would do its breathing. It would use external muscles like that.
They always claimed that it was just,
No, it wasn't there.
it says that in
When you look at the video of it, you'll see that. Yeah. It does, they're not.
Chris, do you have that on your phone, that little bitty piece of a mouse breathing liquid?
No.
Okay.
well, okay, so it was in the movie. And where could you use it?
It was Benny, the mouse was Benny, it was a rat,
Was it a rat?
Yeah, it was called Benny. Was the name.
What? Benny was in Benny. Was the
Okay,
okay.
some things you just never, you try to forget, but you can never.
All right. There's many uses for this, you know, neonatal medicine for babies, you know, newborns, their lungs tend to stick together. And so you use it to cure that, critical care medicine, acute respiratory failure, emergency and rescue. I was watching the show the other day and they're talking about a person that drowned. They're getting him out of the water. Well, you know, if you had liquid there, you could just pump it in and force the water out and supply oxygen at the same time. And that'll probably save people pretty fast. And this third thing you get out of it is you can control the temperature. And it's the other thing that happens to people in drowning, the temperature. And if your lungs are full with something warm, you're going to heat up pretty quick. A lot better than external heating. Pardon?
Your top one, number one, the neonatal was really a big deal. That saved a lot of babies.
Yeah. Space medicine got there. Okay. Oh. And I thought, as a non-medical person, that in COVID, since you got stuff in your lungs If you put that in there, and Lee also claimed that the particles used in this medicine was it's much smaller than the red blood cell. And it'll go places that red blood cells won't go. And so, for example, in COVID, you could pump it in, it would help mucus coming out and go in there and supply oxygen. I sent a letter to the governor, I sent a letter to
Mhm.
all kinds of people and never got a response, of course. Who am I? But I think they could have saved a lot of people. One of their applications. The other thing he came up with was artificial blood, which Rob was talking about. And started to work on that, and this is not what it looks like. In 1960 in Alabama, and continued to work until his death. He joined SBI. That's clear over here. Oh, where it is. Okay, there. Yeah, it is. All right.
Tell them what SBI is.
Synthetic Blood International. A little, I can sidetrack that, I guess. When Lee came back, Alabama, he went to Children's Hospital in Cincinnati. Cincinnati Children's Hospital Research Foundation. You probably worked there.
I'll think of it in a minute. So you got me, let me see, Institute for Developmental Research, IDR.
The IDR?
Yeah,
Okay.
Institute for Development, that's where we were at. That's right. When I worked for him, that was the place.
Okay.
At
It's
Children's.
Children's Hospital.
Yeah, it was Children's Hospital, but it was a separate building.
It's a neat building, as I recall, it looked like a tower. Yeah.
Institute for Developmental Research. And we were the Department of Physiology.
And in that building was Salk
Yes. Yeah.
and Heimlich.
Yeah, big ones.
And they did the monkey work was done there. You know, on the vaccine. And
Yeah, just quite a famous building.
Comment
Yes.
Joan, just that she wanted to comment that the surgeries that were done on babies with the heart and lung machine were done in Birmingham at the University of Alabama Medical Center. She also said that while he was at that location, he brought about the integration of using a blood bank and having a staff lunchroom. A staff lunchroom being integrated.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
The real, the artificial blood looks like milk. And part of the trick with it is that you put the fluorocarbon liquid into this saline solution. And to get it in, you use it similar to how they make milk. Get rid of the butterfat on top. They run through an emulsifier. Okay. It's basically forcing it through a small hole, as I recall.
That's right.
It was one in the Kettering building, you couldn't figure out what to do. And when you do that, it makes very small particles like we were talking about. And it stays in the liquid, much like butter stays in the milk. You get a constant solution. And it looks like milk. Some of the things that you talked about in the mouse experiments is when you do that with the mice, you're not doing blood, but you get them breathing the liquid.
I don't know.
They have pink eyes to start with, but as they get this liquid, which doesn't have color to it, their eyes turn clear. And their skin, just, okay.
Oh. Well, I've been told that that's why because they got it to clinical trials after that had died, human.
Yeah.
After that had died. None of this is true or not. Bob, maybe you do, but I read somewhere that they couldn't get enough people to volunteer for the human trials. And so they had to give up on doing the human trials, but I think the reason they couldn't get many people to volunteer is that you would really look weird. I mean, you'd be totally pale, your eyes would be, I mean, for the period of time you were in that study, you
The,
look like a ghost, you know?
the applications are so many for the artificial blood. I mean, it doesn't have type. And it stores at room temperature. So, yeah, talk about battlefield conditions. You know, people, the first thing they give you is an IV of saline, basically. All that's doing is adding volume to it. It's not supplying anything that'll keep you alive.
And it's gonna go out, it's gonna go right out into the tissues and outside of the vascular space too.
Yeah.
Unless you've got proteins to, you create that colloid pressure and hold the liquids in the bloodstream, which is where you want it.
You really need something to carry oxygen. That's the first thing you're gonna need. And so, you know, that's what this would be great for. And again, battlefield situation, everybody could carry one. It's non-tight and storable.
Yeah.
Oh, well. We can figure out a lot of things.
I wanted to clarify a point, sorry, that going back, Joe wanted to clarify that the blood bank was integrated with his influence, not just
I'll start it.
that
Okay.
he helped to clarify that anyone's blood was good for anyone else.
Oh, all right.
They did a lot of fighting for black people.
when they were in Alabama.
Oh, there's many stories when he's down there.
Yeah.
I think it was part of the reason he left. Moving up there. Okay. How are we doing? Do we have to stop at 30 or?
You're
23.
Probably within a few minutes, people's attention span drops and it's darker out for drivers.
We have to buy dinner.
You gotta be kidding.
If you want to stay longer, they want a pizza.
Okay, well, basically.
Do the enzyme electrode. We've done liquid breathing in the tub, and blah, 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 all these, and there's blood. So this is the
Instrument they're talking about as far as the biosensor. Okay.
and
It,
YSI is a high
significant contributor to this starting in 1970.
a little background on that, might as well.
Oh my God. This was given at Lee's Memorial by Harvey Truelander. It was a very interesting story. 1970, Lee and Fred Hooven, I'll give you a little about Fred and me, Harvey Truelander. He was invited, Lee Clark invited him to his house for a demonstration. And what he did is take two beakers. One with just sugar water in it, and the other with an enzyme. People know what enzymes are. Okay, it's something that helps convert one thing to another without being eaten up process. Very unique thing. Okay, so he's got glucose oxidase with an enzyme and a beaker with sugar in it and two wires in that beaker. So he's sitting here and he pours the glucose oxidase into that beaker and he gets a reading. And that's like, you know, it's a simple experiment, but that started the whole enzyme probe biosensor. All right, so I just said what I did.
So
Yeah, let's quit here. Oh, yeah. Oh, Fred Hooven. I'll tell Fred Hooven's story. Fred Hooven helped start YSI. He was an Antioch student. He went off, did many things. He did the radio directional signal that's still used today. He was quite an inventor. As I recall, he worked for Ford or one of them. They invented the 5-way tailgate. You remember those that flapped down or opened up? He did that. Okay, so there's this story he used to tell. where he went out to lunch. And he drove out to lunch and he drove this Cadillac out to lunch. And he went inside, got done, came outside, and there's a woman standing beside the thing, really tore up. She says, I backed into your car. She's all worried about this nice Cadillac and she's backed into it. And he looks at her and says, oh, don't worry about it. We're going to crush it tomorrow. It was a prototype. They can't keep prototypes. You don't want to get out in the public and see whatever happens to them. So they literally crushed them. That's enough story. Yeah, that's cool. So I like to quit here.
Becky, did you want to tell us about the items that are on display?
Oh, good. And I can too. There's some on the other table back here. Go ahead.
Over there leaning against the wall and around there is our sample that's art. He never thought of himself as an artist. He thought he was just playing, But I have over 600 pieces at the house. These are just a few of them I picked that were from different time periods and different mediums that he was using. When he was legally blind, the only way he could draw was he had a ball jar with a hole in the lid and a long eardrum, like Doppler. And he'd pull that out on white paper, he'd draw, real fast like that. But he could see that contrast of black and white. So the black and white ones were from that time period. I have art of his from when he was in high school. He was doing oil paintings back then. And he'd get flowers or vegetables and, add color to his paintings with those things. He was very creative. Or he glued sunflower seeds on. And he was playing. That was his relaxation. So that's that. These are pretty self-explanatory. That one picture, his mom, that was in the newspaper in Niagara Falls, she grew up. It was her wedding day. There's, Eleanor Clark's getting married today. And to that guy. That one on the end was when Mom and Dad were at Antioch. The one in the middle, the long thing, is from Dad's memorial. Just a collection of pictures and maybe a couple of sayings of that. This one right here, this last one I'll tell you about is Vishugupta. That one was 1949. I don't know what they were doing. They were probably over at Bell's.
Yes.
Sneaking around working on the art machine or something.
Okay, you said he was, you sent me when he was blind, not totally blind, but had eye problems, terrible eye problems. Could only see black and white, not very, but anyway, what was the dates on that?
The one with Vishugupta.
No, when was his eye trouble?
The
90s.
Yeah, I think it started in the late 80s and then into the 90s.
So it's amazing that, you go from the late 80s through the 90s. This guy can't really see, and he's still going. But he's legally blind.
He had cataract surgery and then he could drive. I mean, it's very nervous.
But the guy just kept going. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And he actually invented something in that too.
Well, the fluorocarbon for ocular surgery.
Yeah, as I understand it, when they did ocular surgery, they had to lay the person upside down to do the surgery.
Pardon?
He had retinal surgery first. And that was successful. And then he got horrible cataracts. It was the cataracts that would cause illegal blindness. But the ocular pressure thing is an issue when they're trying to tack the retinas back out.
Alan is thinking about when they use the fluorocarbon to weight down the retina and then they spot weld it back onto the tissue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But they can do that face up.
Face up. So now the doctor didn't have to climb under the table to do the surgery. He could
Exactly.
do it from above.
Wow.
And he got a patent on that.
Yeah,
Probably be easier to do it in zero gravity.
Joan is making the comment that he had detached retinas, and after the surgery for that, they could not do cataract surgery. They were worried that the retinas would be affected, but later they had perfected cataract surgery so that it was safe to do that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, that is.
I gotta get another date to do this. We do a summary ahead.
Yeah.
We started that. I hope you enjoyed it.
In June.
So trying to change the date
I don't,
Either that or I'll attend
by Zoom, you know, yeah.
yeah. And if they don't let me into Canada, I'll be in Seattle, so.
But I was gonna, they have a, Canada is not for sale, hats now in the style of MAGA.
So I was gonna get one of those. And I'm taking orders for Canadian flags.
Good.
We're good. Oh, yeah, we got some stuff back there for you to look at.